Welcome to LevelUp 2021. On June 22nd, 2020, the keyword IDFA reached its peak on Google Trends. The reason for that is obviously WWDC 2020. Today, 1 year after, we're going to be celebrating its 1-year birthday. My name is Yevgeny Peres. I'm the VP of Growth at ironSource. There's great content out there regarding iOS 14. We decided to summarize the last year, share a lot of the information that is out there, and hopefully connect all the dots together so you will be able to understand where things are headed so you can make the right decisions. In this session, we're going to cover the key events over last year. We're going to share some of the market trends, some of the public information out there, and add some of our own platform's data, and obviously the current snapshot of market adoption, and summarize with key takeaways for you to decide what you should do next for your business. Quick reminder of what this change is about. Obviously the biggest part of it is the fundamental change of how tracking will be happening. Usually when talking about ATT, the App Tracking Transparency Framework, the prompt itself is discussed, how to optimize it, what are the opt-in rates. It is usually overlooked the fact that a big part of the user base is not even seeing those prompts. Basically, based on the system level setting, which is to allow or not apps to request to track. Quick reminder: users that had their limit ad tracking on, which is roughly around 40% in the US before iOS 14, when migrating to iOS 14 and above, will have the allow apps to request to track toggle off, which means roughly 40% will not even be able to see the prompt, which is a key element, obviously, of how to approach this challenge of maximizing the opt-in rates. As a response to that, obviously, Apple provided a new measurement alternative, a new iteration of that, SK Network. We're not going to go into details right now, obviously, but it is also part of the change as a result of how ATT impacts the current mechanism we're using for tracking within the industry. Another change, which is probably the least impactful, is the privacy labels, which I think are also playing a role in this story. Well, looking at the timeline of events, we're going to start with June 22nd last year, obviously, where ATT was announced, SK Network 2.0 was announced. We're going to go through 3 different layers: the macro level, all the bigger forces that are playing here, the ATT front, and SK Network, what exactly has happened since June 22nd till today. On the macro front, I think the most interesting part is how things rolled out within the first couple of months until late August, which is a couple of weeks before ATT should be rolled out with iOS 14. That's the first time one of the bigger platforms respond with their own approach, where Facebook basically say that they will not collect the IDFA, they will not prompt for ATT, and that's what they think is right back then. Obviously has its own impact on, a potential impact on the Facebook Audience Network, which is outside of the Facebook family of apps. 1 week after, related or not, Apple decides to postpone ATT. It is still something that will be released, but in a functional, in a different way, where the plan is to roll it out later next year. That's what is announced back then, and then it becomes early spring. That basically means ATT will be rolled out, but IDFA will operate like you used to unless you engage with ATT. That's also one of the reasons why many developers decided not to prompt for ATT in order for not to lose their IDFA coverage. Later on that fall, around December, mid-December, Facebook goes to New York Times with these full page ads, basically taking a very strong stance on trying to protect the small businesses against this change. Very quickly, Apple CEO Tim Cook tweets this tweet, which is very interesting in the context of, hey, everything can work exactly like it used to work as long as users decide that they're fine with it. And in this mock-up, Tim is using Facebook potential mock-up, the Facebook app prompt itself, as an example of what exactly Facebook hinting them what exactly they should be saying, basically responding to Facebook's actions. And at the same time, basically the same days as Facebook publishers those New York Times ads, they change their mind, obviously based on the developments, where they decide that, and this is basically their response, where number 4 basically says that even though they disagree with Apple's approach, they have no choice but to show the prompt, otherwise they will be rejected from the App Store. And this is what we know that turns into how Facebook, the Facebook family of apps, engage with ATT till this day, basically trying to maximize that IDFA rate and other tracking capabilities based on the user's opt-in. When looking at 2020, it's mostly those big actions that are happening. On the implementation front of ATT, nothing is really happening because Apple decides to postpone the enforcement of what ATT really does to later to 2021. On the SK network front, nothing interesting is happening other than a big bug fix, which is very interesting. We're talking about November, which is around 2 months after iOS 14 is out, ATT is out. SK Network 2.0 introduces 2 very important improvements to the framework. One is Apple will tell where did the user, the acquired user come from, which app, the source app value. And the second new functionality is the conversion value, where they will also share what did the user achieve within the app in terms of post-install engagement. That functionality did not work until November 6th, which is obviously also shows how the market is ready on all fronts for this change. So the resolution there is on these 2 fronts. Obviously, these 2 values are critical to operate, and that they're a critical element of the new 2.0 version. And it took 5 months since, almost 5 months since it was announced, which is very interesting. When you look at 2021, things accelerate very fast on all fronts, and we're going to go deeper on that, starting actually with Google, which is very interesting when looking at the bigger forces, how they play 2020. Google's response was pretty silent. It started with basically Google as an app developer on the App Store ecosystem. How did they respond to Apple's new requirements where the privacy labels need to be adopted by December 8th? Basically, Google did not play along by just not updating their apps until late February. And they also announced that within their family of apps, they will not show ATT. And obviously, which is connected to how the guidelines, how the privacy labels are impacted in terms of what Google, the developer, communicates through those within the App Store. Late February, the YouTube app is updated with the privacy labels. Same goes for Gmail. We're talking about almost 3 months after that deadline, and that's not something that usually happens, especially for these kind of apps in terms of the frequency of updates. We're talking about almost 3 months without any updates, which is huge for someone like Google, the developer. What is interesting also that at the same time, Google, the Google Play ecosystem responds with following actually Apple's stance on privacy labels and announced their own safety section, which basically is very similar to be released later 2021. Also on the tracking front, they do create some traction on that front where they decide that moving forward, after this new update is released, the Google operating system will zero out the Google advertising ID, similar to what Apple did 5 years ago on iOS 10. So if a limit ad tracking functionality is on, that toggle is on, the IDFA equivalent, which is the gate, will be zeroed out. Very similar to what Apple actually did 5 years ago, though definitely not what is happening right now, and also still with how Google Play works, still far in terms of functionality due to the Google's deterministic alternative for attribution, which is the refer, which is a key element of attribution. So effectively, you can still track for attribution purposes, though you cannot retarget and track those users using Gade once they turn on the system level limit ad tracking toggle. Reminding you that looking at the data, this specific topic is very different in terms of how Google and Apple, the ecosystem, approached it, but there's still, this is the first traction on Google's front since then. Current limit ad tracking rates on Google are around 1.5–2%, which is very low compared to Apple's 35–40% limit ad tracking rates prior to the iOS 14 change. Still some traction, but definitely not even close to what is happening on Apple. March 2021, very interesting development. The CAID is revealed. Basically, we're talking about a group of companies working with some of China's biggest tech giants to find a workaround that in this new era of ATT, how will these companies be able to advertise and essentially track those users? We're talking about a user level, device level identifier generated on the device to be able to facilitate tracking, where this identifier will be the same across different apps. So essentially this is a mechanism that will be sticky across apps and will be able to facilitate what Apple is calling tracking. Very quickly, Apple responds with a warning not to go that route, and basically says, hey, any app that we see with a code running trying to generate that device level identifier will be rejected. That's a very clear guideline. Very quickly after that was revealed. A couple days after, on the ATT front, for the first time we're starting to see some enforcement and some progress. April 1st, Apple rejects a group of apps that have certain third-party SDKs implemented, where those SDKs are doing exactly the same or around the same lines of what I mentioned earlier. We're basically trying to generate a device level identifier. Basically reject that code until that code is released. That code is released and those apps are back live at in the store. A couple weeks after Apple rejects those group of apps for ATT reasons, iOS 14.5 is launched, and that's the first OS version that includes the promised functionality. We're talking about almost a year after WWDC 2020. When you look at the data, and this is a great visualization published by Branch, the adoption rate of 14.5 is not as fast as usually in the past, and you can see that it's followed by 14.5.1 improvements, 14.6, which is the latest version that is out there. And for the adoption to spike, like in previous version, Apple needs to decide when to pull the trigger and push that big red button that sends the OS version proactively to all the devices out there. And it's happening on June 3rd, where basically this is what people are getting before they go to sleep, that tomorrow morning basically they're going to be prompted for ATT across all their apps. It's happening June 3rd, the weekend before WWDC 2021. Interesting timing. Obviously, looking at the data again published by Branch since then, you can see the spike happening as expected. By now we're at around 70% adoption, and we're a year after it's announced, and we only have the last couple of days or maybe weeks to see what exactly is happening of what was promised. And that's a very interesting aspect of the challenge here, obviously, for what we've all been through in the last year. On the SK network front, like I mentioned, 2020 was a boring year other than that big bug fix, though things really accelerated in terms of seeing how much Apple is investing it, and they made a couple of different interesting steps. 2.2 came with VTA support, view through attribution, starting 14.5. 3.0 was announced late April, right before 14.5 was released, where multi-touch or the equivalent was announced to be supported starting 14.6, which is basically what is live right now. And that shows some functionality add-ons. Late May, a couple weeks ago, two big interesting things happened. One is that postbacks stopped coming in from the devices itself, right? So until that point in time, the device itself was the one that was sending the postback according to documentation. Starting that point in time, we started seeing the postbacks coming in from Apple servers. So obviously the purpose here is to improve the privacy of those users. At the same time, actually, Apple did lower the privacy thresholds, which is a whole different topic, obviously a key topic for within the SK Network challenge. So while still protecting the user level privacy, those privacy thresholds were which define whether or not a postback will include where did that user come from, the source app, and or whether Apple will share the conversion value of what exactly did the user achieve within the app in terms of in-app engagement. Definitely Apple is making strides on that front and making progress. On the privacy threshold front, this was published by Read from Dataseat, also showing that starting May 21st, that change and how it looks like on the aggregate level of what is the visibility a certain marketing channel has into what did that user achieve within the advertised app. Same time, Apple is also taking a stance here in front of the consumers and starts a big push of this ad, which if you have not seen, I think it's a great opportunity to take a minute and watch how Apple is communicating ATT to its users.
Felix?
Name?
Felix.
Date of birth?
November 5th, 1986.
Tracking current location.
Can I have a taste of your ice cream?
Here's what you spent last month.
Crumbs from your table. Can I interfere in your crisis? Can you hear those people behind
This will
me?
help with the itching.
Can I have a taste of your ice cream? Can I lick the crumbs from your table? No, mind your own business. Why don't you mind your own business? Why don't you mind your own business?
Definitely an interesting opportunity to see how Apple sees what tracking was about, what was happening behind the scenes until this change, what this change is about, and kind of hinting what the users should do when they see the prompt next time. So I expect that will impact at least the behavior of the users that have seen this ad. Definitely not something that anyone will be able to track. Since then, WWDC 2021, a couple weeks ago, iOS 15 is announced, which will impact what we're working on in the next year. Obviously, on the SK Network front, two interesting developments. One is the Apple are kind of acknowledging the change that they've made on the IP front, that the change that I mentioned earlier, where actually it's starting 14.6, the postbacks that will be fired will have the IP address protection. So no longer the device's IP origin, but rather a different IP. And the most important change, I think, for the ecosystem is that Apple are providing a solution finally to have the developers consume those postbacks as well. Starting 15.0, Apple introduced a solution to have the developers get a copy of the winning postback. That's something that will definitely impact the dynamics within the ecosystem, because those postbacks will include all the data Apple provides to the network, the same also the developers. Probably the bigger change with iOS 15 that was announced is the private relay as part of the privacy pillar. Definitely not something that will have an impact in the short term, but is very clear on the big moves Apple is making on the privacy front. Essentially, this change is going to be limited only to iCloud users that opt in. and this change is mostly about trying to anonymize the IP address of a specific user, only on Safari at first, only on HTTP calls coming in, but it's still very clear how Apple are serious about this topic, a big change that will also have a big impact on what we're doing here. Some data and trends to share from our platform that I think can show what is happening right now in terms of market adoption. I think that's the easiest part of this topic. This slide shows how quickly the apps showing the ads adopted the right SDK versions, update their plist values to be able to facilitate impressions that are eligible for SK network measurement. Not a lot of heavy lifting there. Still took a while. Think about the initial September launch date. Definitely something that is still not perfect, but is pretty stable on the 95%. ATT, opt-in rates, very steady around 20%, climbing just a bit in the last week or so, still around 20%. We're talking about essentially the percentage of users that a developer will have their access to their IDFA. It's not far from what it used to be, around 50-60%, but think about the impact on attribution, where it's 20% is, it does not mean 20% pre-iOS 14, because in order for attribution to work as we were used to, you need to have also the same opt-in on where the user is coming from, and those numbers are significantly lower, around 5-6%. And that's something that is critical to understand for the purpose and the functionality of what IDFA role is moving forward. Since users are still opting in, there's things to do with that data, obviously, but it's going to be different in terms of functionality. When you look at the market from the advertiser perspective, so this covers all of the advertisers that are live on the ironSource platform. When you look at the adoption, the adoption rate of their progress on the SK front, so the blue line, the blue lines show, the blue bars are basically showing those that have not implemented SK network at all. Those apps are not sending any postbacks through. Apple is not sending any postbacks on their behalf, so either they have not implemented or they made any mistakes there. The red bars show those that have implemented SK network. And the yellow ones is showing also the part of those that have also implemented the conversion value functionality. That's for across all of our platform. When you look at the top 100 advertisers on the platform, the picture is completely different. Almost all of them have implemented SK network, and almost all of them have implemented the conversion value functionality in order to signal the marketing channels what the quality of a user is in the best way possible. I'm not going into the details of how and what to do with that. Also interesting to see on this slide is that bug fix from November, and where was the adoption back then in November again, and that's 2 months after it was supposed to be here. So in terms of the market adoption, we're getting closer. Still, what I want you to take from these slides is the difference between the top 100 and all the rest. Basically, a big change in the adoption here, which will give those developers an edge against their competitors and potentially help them operate better and increase their market share. We'll summarize the last year. This is very clear. Apple is very serious about privacy, not only about the framework and the positioning, but also on how things are enforced, both technically, IDFA and IP, and also in terms of policy and the guidelines, the CID, the SDKs that were running code to basically generate those user level identifiers. And that's something that I think is very clear when you look in the last year and connect the dots. That's pretty straightforward. I think one takeaway that I think is very important to remember, and that's something that is not discussed enough, is that IDFA is not dead. It's still there because most apps are asking for permission to track, so it is there for those that opt in, but the functionality is no longer the same. It has potential new use cases, but it's not dead. It's something to think about, how each developer is utilizing that identifier and for what purposes. And I think the most important takeaway when looking at the last year and connecting all the dots and looking at the different adoption rates between those that have moved faster than others is that I hope that this is not a surprise party for some of you. The faster you move, the faster you understand how quickly you need to adapt in terms of your ability to both read the map, understand the developments, and also to act quickly, change, iterate if things are moving to different direction, and also if the direction that you've chosen is not the best one. How do you create that framework that you're able to test new concepts very quick and move faster than others? Thank you very much.